The Mary Tyler Moore mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good. She could turn the world on with her smile, throw her hat in the air with boundless optimism, and convince America she was the perfect embodiment of sunny independence and relatable charm. For generations, Mary Tyler Moore has represented the ideal career woman. Talented, gracious, and perpetually upbeat, both on screen and off. But beneath this carefully crafted image lurked a far more complex reality, one of profound personal tragedy, hidden struggles, and a public persona that masked private pain. Today we're exploring the true Mary Tyler Moore story that Hollywood kept carefully hidden for decades. Revelations that transform our understanding of one of television's most beloved icons, from devastating loss to secret battles with addiction, from on-set tensions to network conflicts. These 5 aspects of Moore's life reveal a woman far different from the cheerful character who defined her public image. What emerges isn't just a more nuanced portrait of a legendary actress, but a troubling glimpse into how thoroughly Hollywood can sanitize and reshape reality to maintain marketable mythologies around its biggest stars. The truth about Mary Tyler Moore isn't bad. It's human, complicated, and far more compelling than the one-dimensional perfection we were sold for decades. The gap between Mary Tyler Moore's public image and private reality represents one of Hollywood's most successful image management campaigns. While viewers saw a perpetually cheerful, perfectly poised professional woman who made it after all, the real Mary Tyler Moore navigated profound personal tragedies, fought private demons, and engaged in behind-the-scenes battles that remained largely invisible to her adoring public. By examining 5 crucial aspects of Moore's life and career that were deliberately minimized or concealed, we can finally appreciate the full complexity of this television icon, a woman whose real story involves far more struggle, pain, and resilience than her carefully polished image ever suggested. Let's uncover the truth about Mary Tyler Moore. Revelations that don't diminish her achievements, but rather highlight the extraordinary strength required to build her legendary career while carrying burdens few fans ever suspected.
It comes across basically as wonderful, riveting drama. Then you get up and...
1. The tragedy of her son's death and the questions it raised. On October 14, 1980, while Mary Tyler Moore was at the height of her fame and influence in Hollywood, her only child, Richard Meeker Jr., died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He was just 24 years old. This devastating loss would haunt Moore for the remainder of her life, influencing everything from her personal relationships to her professional choices. Yet the circumstances surrounding his death and her complex relationship with her son remained largely unexamined in public discourse about her legacy. Richie, as he was known to family and friends, was the son of Moore's first marriage to Richard Meeker Sr., a union that began when Moore was just 18 years old. Born when Moore was only 19, Richie grew up during his mother's rise to television stardom, first as Laura Petrie on The Dick Van Dyke Show, and later as the iconic Mary Richards on The Mary Tyler Moore Show. While publicly Moore maintained the image of a devoted mother who balanced career and family responsibilities, the reality was far more complicated. By Moore's own later admission in her autobiography, After All, her demanding work schedule and focus on her burgeoning career meant she was often absent during Richie's formative years. "I was not the greatest mother," she wrote with characteristic frankness. "I was so busy wanting to be a good actress that I tended to place more emphasis on my career than I should have." This admission, rare for a female star of her era, hinted at the complex dynamics that characterized their relationship throughout Richie's life. As Richie entered adolescence, their relationship reportedly became increasingly strained. According to multiple sources close to the family, he struggled with his identity as the son of a famous mother, torn between pride in her accomplishments and resentment of her absences and the constant public attention. During periods of his teen years, Richie lived primarily with his father following Moore's divorce from Meeker Sr. and subsequent marriage to television executive Grant Tinker. By his early 20s, Richie had developed his own struggles, including what some accounts describe as periods of substance abuse and difficulty finding a clear career path. While Moore never publicly detailed these challenges during his lifetime, in later years, she would acknowledge that her son had faced the usual problems of growing up, a euphemistic reference to troubles that were likely more serious than this characterization suggested. The circumstances of Richie's death remain both tragic and somewhat murky. The official ruling was accidental death, with investigators concluding that he had been playing with a shotgun from his personal collection when it discharged unexpectedly. However, as Moore herself would later question in private conversations with close friends, there were troubling aspects of the incident that never fully aligned with the accident narrative. The gun in question was a sawed-off shotgun model called a snake charmer, a small, easily concealed weapon primarily designed for personal protection rather than sport shooting. Questions arose about why Ritchie would have been handling this particular weapon, why it was loaded in his living quarters on the campus of the University of Southern California, where he was a student, and how someone familiar with firearms could have had such a catastrophic accident with a cleaned, properly maintained weapon. America's sweetheart lost her only child to a gun and never fully recovered, observed one longtime friend of Moore's who witnessed her grief in the years following Ritchie's death. This assessment captures the profound impact of this loss on Moore's life, a tragedy from which she never fully healed, despite her continued professional success and public composure. The most poignant aspect of this tragedy was Moore's private expression of guilt about her relationship with Ritchie. According to those in her inner circle, she tortured herself with questions about whether she had been sufficiently present as a mother, whether her career priorities had negatively impacted his development, and whether more attentive parenting might have somehow prevented the circumstances that led to his death. In her 1995 autobiography, Moore addressed this guilt directly, writing, "There is no question about it. By the time Ritchie was 5, I had already let him down. When he needed me the most, I was busier and even more self-concerned than I had been when he was an impressionable infant." This rare public acknowledgement of parental regret from a major star offered a glimpse into the private anguish that had shadowed Moore's outwardly successful life. What makes this aspect of Moore's story particularly significant is how thoroughly it was minimized in the public narrative of her life during the height of her fame. While her sitcom character, Mary Richards, was presented as the quintessential independent career woman, unmarried and childless by choice, the real Mary Tyler. Moore was navigating the complex challenges of balancing motherhood with ambition, and later, processing the grief of losing her only child under circumstances that raised disturbing questions. The stark contrast between Moore's sunny public image and the private anguish she endured following Ritchie's death represents one of the most profound disconnects between celebrity persona and personal reality in Hollywood history. While viewers continued to associate her with the upbeat, can-do spirit of her television characters, Moore was privately devastated by a loss from which she would never completely recover. A tragedy that fundamentally shaped her later life and career in ways her audience never fully understood.
See, I think of cooking as a kind of art form, and the thought of somebody after you've poured all your creativity.
2. Secret alcoholism that nearly destroyed her career. While Mary Tyler Moore was portraying the poised professional Mary Richards, a character who rarely drank more than an occasional glass of wine, the actress herself was engaged in a private struggle with alcoholism that threatened both her health and her career. This battle with addiction, which began during her years on The Dick Van Dyke Show and intensified throughout the 1970s, remained largely hidden from public view until Moore herself chose to reveal it in her 1995 autobiography, After All. The origins of Moore's alcoholism appear to have been rooted in both personal insecurity and the intense pressures of maintaining her public image. By her own account, she began drinking to cope with the anxiety of living up to the perfect, wholesome persona she had created on screen. "I drank to numb the loneliness," she later wrote, describing how the gap between her confident public image and her private self-doubt created an emotional burden that alcohol temporarily relieved. During the filming of The Mary Tyler Moore Show, 1970 to 1977, her drinking remained largely contained to after hours, though some colleagues began noticing concerning patterns. According to several crew members who worked on the series, Moore would sometimes arrive on Monday mornings, showing subtle signs of weekend drinking, slightly bloodshot eyes or minor memory issues, with lines that would have normally been no challenge for her famously precise performance style. "She made it look easy, but backstage, she was falling apart," recalled one producer who worked closely with Moore during this period. This observation highlights the extraordinary professional discipline Moore maintained, allowing her to deliver flawless performances while privately struggling with an escalating dependency that was beginning to affect her off-camera life. By the late 1970s, as The Mary Tyler Moore Show concluded its successful run, Moore's drinking had progressed to a point where it began affecting her health and relationships. Close friends from this period have described how Moore would often begin drinking in the early afternoon and continue through the evening, a pattern that became particularly problematic during periods when she wasn't actively working on a production with its associated schedule demands. The most severe phase of Moore's alcoholism coincided with several personal crises: the dissolution of her marriage to Grant Tinker, the tragic death of her son Richie, and a series of professional disappointments as she struggled to find successful projects following her iconic sitcom. This perfect storm of personal and professional challenges pushed her drinking to dangerous levels, eventually leading to a health crisis that forced her to confront her addiction. In 1984, Moore checked herself into the Betty Ford Center for treatment, a decision that came after what she later described as hitting bottom, when she realized her drinking was threatening not just her career, but her very survival. This hospitalization marked a turning point, though her recovery would prove to be a long-term process rather than an immediate transformation. What makes Moore's struggle with alcoholism particularly significant is how successfully it was concealed from the public during the height of her fame. While other celebrities of the era saw their substance abuse problems become tabloid fodder, Moore's carefully maintained public image and the protective circle of colleagues and friends around her helped keep her addiction largely private until she chose to reveal it years later. This concealment was facilitated by both the television industry's interest in protecting a valuable star and the different media environment of that era. Without today's omnipresent paparazzi and social media documentation, celebrities in the 1970s had greater privacy to deal with personal issues away from public scrutiny. Network executives, producers, and even fellow cast members had strong financial and professional incentives to help maintain Moore's pristine public image, regardless of her private struggles. When Moore finally did address her alcoholism publicly in her autobiography and subsequent interviews, she brought to the disclosure the same candor and dignity that had characterized her professional work. Rather than offering excuses or minimizing her behavior, she acknowledged the full extent of her dependency and the harm it had caused both to herself and to those around her. This honesty, coming from a star who had been so closely associated with perfection, was both surprising and powerful. "I am not a victim," she wrote. "No one held me down and poured alcohol into me. I suffered from a disease, but the decision to drink was mine, and so was the decision to stop." This statement reflected Moore's characteristic refusal to evade personal responsibility, even while acknowledging the medical nature of addiction. Moore's eventual openness about her alcoholism helped reshape public understanding of addiction, particularly among women. As one of the first female celebrities of her stature to speak frankly about substance abuse, she helped reduce the stigma associated with addiction and recovery, especially for women who, like her, might outwardly appear to have it all together while privately struggling. The disconnect between Moore's perfectly controlled public persona and her private battle with alcoholism represents a profound irony in her life story. The woman who created television's most famous image of the competent, balanced professional woman was herself grappling with a dependency that threatened that very competence and balance. This contradiction doesn't diminish her achievements, but rather highlights the extraordinary discipline required to maintain her career while fighting a disease that has derailed countless lives.
He's reasonable about it. No. They treat you like grown-ups, so you get to choose what you're going to eat.
3. Her real-life coldness and estrangement from co-stars. Perhaps the most jarring contrast between Mary Tyler Moore's public image and private reality was the significant gap between her warm on-screen persona and what many colleagues described as a much cooler, more controlling personality behind the scenes. While viewers fell in love with Laura Petrie's emotional openness and Mary Richards' infectious warmth, those who worked closely with Moore often encountered a woman who maintained careful emotional distance and exercised tight control over both her image and her productions. This disconnect first became apparent during The Dick Van Dyke Show, where Moore's professional precision and focus sometimes created distance between her and the more relaxed, improvisational approach of co-stars like Dick Van Dyke and Maury Amsterdam. While never manifesting as outright conflict, this difference in working styles occasionally created a subtle tension that belied the easy chemistry viewers saw on screen. By the time Moore launched her eponymous show in 1970, her professional demeanor had evolved into what some cast and crew members described as a kind of pleasant but definite aloofness. Unlike the character of Mary Richards, who formed deep friendships with her colleagues at WJMTV, the real Moore maintained more formal relationships with most of her co-stars, cordial and respectful, but rarely developing into the close personal bonds viewers might have expected based on the show's depiction of workplace camaraderie. She smiled on camera. Off camera, she ran a tight ship and cut deep when crossed, noted one writer who worked on The Mary Tyler Moore Show during its middle seasons. This observation captured Moore's dual nature, the warm, engaging performer who could instantly connect with viewers through the camera, and the more reserved, sometimes intimidating professional who maintained careful boundaries with those around her. Perhaps the most revealing assessment came from Betty White, who played the man-hungry happy homemaker Sue Ann Nivens on the show. Years later, White would observe with characteristic candor. She wasn't as warm as people thought, but she was smart enough to fake it. Coming from White, known for her genuine friendliness both on and off camera, this statement offered particular insight into the gap between Moore's public and private personas. Moore's controlling tendencies extended beyond personal interactions to include significant influence over production decisions. As both the star and co-owner, with then-husband Grant Tinker, of MTM Enterprises, the company that produced her show, Moore exercised unusual power for an actress of that era. She had substantial input on scripts, casting decisions, and even technical aspects like lighting and camera angles that would typically be outside an actor's purview. This control occasionally led to conflicts with writers and producers who found themselves navigating not just the normal challenges of television production, but also the additional layer of Moore's exacting standards and specific vision for her character. Several writers from the show have described how Moore would reject storylines or dialogue that she felt contradicted her understanding of Mary Richards or might undermine the carefully constructed public image she had built. One of the more significant behind-the-scenes tensions developed between Moore and Valerie Harper, who played her best friend Rhoda Morgenstern on the series. While their on-screen chemistry suggested a deep friendship, their off-camera relationship was reportedly more complicated. As Harper's character grew in popularity, eventually leading to the spin-off series Rhoda, sources close to the production noted that Moore seemed increasingly concerned about being overshadowed, a natural insecurity perhaps, but one that created distance between the two actresses despite their professional respect for each other. Moore's relationships with male co-stars like Ed Asner, who played her boss Lou Grant, and Ted Knight, who portrayed the buffoonish anchorman Ted Baxter, were similarly cordial but measured. While she maintained professional respect for their talents, the warm affection that characterized their on-screen relationships rarely extended beyond the set. Asner, in particular, has noted in interviews that while he and Moore worked together successfully for years, they never developed the close friendship that viewers might have assumed existed given their characters' relationship. What makes these interpersonal dynamics particularly noteworthy isn't that they were unusually contentious by Hollywood standards. Indeed, many successful shows have been produced amid far greater behind-the-scenes conflict. Rather, their significance lies in how dramatically they contradicted the public perception of Moore as the embodiment of the warm, relatably human character she portrayed. This contradiction wasn't lost on Moore herself, who demonstrated considerable self-awareness about the gap between her public image and private nature. In her autobiography, she acknowledged her tendency toward emotional reserve, writing, "I'm not as warm in person as people might think from watching me on television. I'm not naturally outgoing, and I'm still trying to polish my social style." This rare admission from a star of her stature offers insight into the psychological complexity of maintaining a public persona so different from one's natural temperament, a challenge that likely contributed to the personal stresses that fueled both her drinking and her exacting professional standards. The effort required to project the warmth and openness that made Mary Richards so beloved, when these qualities didn't come naturally to Moore herself, represented a performance that extended far beyond the shooting schedule and script requirements.
Well, what happened, when I was a kid growing up, when you looked at a car, you knew a Ford was a Ford.
4. The first TV actress accused of being too political for her own show. While The Mary Tyler Moore Show is now celebrated as a groundbreaking feminist milestone in television history, the reality behind its production reveals a constant tension between Moore's progressive vision and network resistance to content deemed too controversial for mainstream audiences. This behind-the-scenes battle over the show's political implications, particularly regarding women's changing roles in society, represents a crucial but largely overlooked aspect of both Moore's career and television history. From its inception, The Mary Tyler Moore Show incorporated elements that were quietly revolutionary for early 1970s television. Its central character was a single, 30-something woman focused on her career rather than finding a husband, a radical departure from how women had typically been portrayed on sitcoms. Mary Richards was financially independent, sexually liberated, though tastefully so by the standards of the time, and defined primarily by her professional ambitions rather than her relationships with men. What viewers didn't see was the constant negotiation required to maintain these progressive elements while satisfying network executives concerned about alienating advertisers and mainstream audiences. According to writers and producers who worked on the series, Moore consistently advocated for storylines that would push boundaries around women's independence, workplace equality, and social issues, often meeting resistance that required compromise or abandonment of more daring concepts. They told her to smile, spin, and be agreeable, and she refused, noted one writer who worked on the show during its early seasons. This observation captures the fundamental tension at the heart of the series, Moore's determination to create a character with genuine agency and complexity versus the network's preference for a more traditionally appealing, less challenging female lead. One of the most significant behind-the-scenes battles involved the show's approach to Mary Richards' sex life. Moore and some of the writers wanted to acknowledge more explicitly that Mary was sexually active, a realistic portrayal of a single woman in her 30s during the early 1970s, when the sexual revolution had already transformed social norms. CBS executives pushed back strongly, insisting that while Mary could date, any implication of sexual activity needed to remain extremely subtle to avoid alienating conservative viewers and sponsors. This resulted in the carefully calibrated approach the show ultimately took. Mary clearly dated and occasionally had men stay overnight, but these elements were handled with such delicacy that more conservative viewers could maintain plausible deniability about what was actually occurring. This compromise reflected the challenging middle ground Moore was attempting to navigate, creating a character who reflected real women's lives while remaining palatable to network television's more restrictive standards. Similar tensions arose around workplace dynamics on the show. Moore advocated for storylines that directly addressed gender discrimination, pay inequality, and sexual harassment, issues that were becoming central to the feminist movement of the 1970s, but remained highly controversial in mainstream media. Network executives frequently pushed back against these more explicitly political storylines, arguing that the show should focus on character comedy rather than social commentary. In one particularly revealing incident, Moore proposed a storyline where Mary would discover she was being paid less than a male colleague with similar responsibilities, a direct commentary on the gender wage gap. According to production memos from the period, CBS executives rejected this concept as too strident and suggested that it would make Mary seem like a women's liber rather than the relatable every woman they wanted her to represent. Moore's response to this ongoing resistance was strategic rather than confrontational. Rather than engaging in public battles with the network, which could have jeopardized the show's future, she worked within the system to incorporate progressive elements in more subtle ways. This approach allowed The Mary Tyler Moore Show to advance feminist ideas through character development and situational comedy rather than explicit political statements. She later said she was told, "Don't make Mary too independent," recalled one producer who worked closely with Moore. This directive from network executives captured their fundamental concern, that a female character who was too assertive, too political, or too independent might alienate the mainstream audience needed for rating success. Moore's genius lay in recognizing that she could advance her vision more effectively through incremental changes than through direct confrontation. The compromises Moore accepted weren't without personal cost. According to those close to her during this period, she sometimes expressed frustration about the constraints placed on the show's content and her character's development. This tension between her more progressive personal views and the moderated version that appeared on screen contributed to the stress that fueled her drinking and created distance between her public and private personas. What makes this aspect of Moore's career particularly significant is how it prefigured debates about representation and politics in entertainment that continue today. The criticism she faced for being too political, even when those politics were expressed through relatively mild character choices rather than explicit statements, established a pattern that would be repeated for decades as television slowly expanded its portrayal of women, minorities, and social issues. In this sense, Moore's behind-the-scenes advocacy represents an important but under-recognized aspect of her legacy. While later feminist icons in television might have been more explicitly political in their public statements, Moore was pioneering the delicate art of advancing progressive ideas within the constraints of mainstream entertainment, creating space for the more openly political content that would follow in subsequent decades. 5. The marriage that broke her and the rumors that followed. Mary Tyler Moore's second marriage to television executive Grant Tinker represented both the height of her professional success and a source of profound personal complexity. As the power couple behind MTM Enterprises, the production company responsible not just for The Mary Tyler Moore Show, but for numerous other television hits of the 1970s, including The Bob Newhart Show, Rhoda, and Lou Grant, Moore and Tinker created one of the most successful and influential entertainment empires of their era. Yet beneath this seemingly perfect professional partnership lay a marriage marked by emotional distance, competing ambitions, and ultimately devastating heartbreak for Moore. Moore and Tinker met while both were working at CBS, she as the rising star of The Dick Van Dyke Show, and he as an advertising executive who would eventually become a network programming executive. Their marriage in 1962, following Moore's divorce from her first husband, Richard Meeker, seemed to offer both personal happiness and professional advantage, a union of talent and business acumen that would prove extraordinarily lucrative for both parties. The founding of MTM Enterprises in 1969 cemented their status as television's premier power couple. Named for Moore, the MTM logo featuring a mewing kitten was a deliberate parody of MGM's Roaring Lion. The company represented a new model of television production, one that gave creative talents unprecedented control over their work while still operating successfully within the commercial network system. This business structure allowed Moore to maintain greater authority over her image and her show than most television stars of the era could dream of achieving. Yet according to those close to the couple, the professional success of MTM masked growing personal disconnection. Tinker, while supportive of Moore's career, maintained a somewhat traditional view of marriage that sometimes clashed with Moore's increasingly independent and feminist perspectives. As one friend of the couple noted, they built an empire and left each other buried beneath it. This observation captures the fundamental irony of their relationship, creating television that celebrated women's independence while navigating the complications such independence created in their own marriage. By the mid-1970s, rumors of trouble in the marriage had begun circulating in Hollywood circles. Tinker's demanding work schedule, which often took him away from their home for extended periods, created both physical and emotional distance. Moore, meanwhile, was dealing with her escalating drinking problem and the ongoing stress of maintaining her public image while fighting private battles. Particularly damaging were persistent rumors of infidelity, though unlike many Hollywood marriages, the speculation centered more on emotional than physical affairs. Colleagues from this period have suggested that both Moore and Tinker developed close relationships with others that, while perhaps not sexually consummated, provided the emotional connection lacking in their marriage. These relationships reportedly created additional tension in a union already strained by professional pressures and personal differences. The most painful aspect of the marriage's ultimate dissolution in 1981 was how thoroughly it shattered Moore's carefully constructed personal narrative. Having built both her public image and her signature television character around the ideal of the capable, confident modern woman, the failure of her marriage to Tinker forced Moore to confront painful questions about the gap between her professional success and personal fulfillment, questions that reportedly contributed to a significant depression following their separation. This period coincided with the tragic death of her son, Richie, creating what Moore later described as the worst time of my life. The combination of professional transition, following the end of her legendary show, personal loss, the death of her only child, and the collapse of her marriage created a perfect storm of emotional challenges that pushed her already problematic drinking to dangerous levels. The aftermath of the divorce revealed Moore's surprising vulnerability despite her public image of strength and resilience. According to those close to her during this period, she experienced the separation as a profound rejection, one that challenged her sense of self-worth in ways that her previous divorce had not. While Tinker moved forward relatively smoothly, quickly establishing himself as president of NBC, Moore struggled to find her footing both personally and professionally. This difficult transition was complicated by the financial arrangements of their divorce. While Moore retained significant assets, Tinker maintained control of MTM Enterprises, the company bearing her initials and built largely on her talent. This corporate separation created an additional layer of loss for Moore, who found herself disconnected from the production company that had defined much of her professional identity for over a decade. The painful irony of this situation wasn't lost on Moore or those around her. The woman who had portrayed television's most famous independent female character had built her real-life production company around her husband's business expertise rather than maintaining independent control. When the marriage ended, this decision left her with diminished influence over the very entertainment empire she had helped create, a stark contrast to the professional autonomy her character Mary Richards had embodied. In subsequent years, Moore would rebuild both her personal life, eventually finding lasting happiness in her third marriage to Robert Levine, and her career through carefully chosen projects and advocacy work, but the collapse of her marriage to Tinker left emotional scars that never fully healed, creating a lingering sadness that friends observed even during happier later periods of her life. What makes this aspect of Moore's story particularly significant is how it reveals the complicated reality behind her groundbreaking portrayal of female independence. Even as she was creating a character who inspired millions of women to pursue their own paths, Moore herself was navigating the much messier reality of balancing professional ambition with personal relationships, often making the same painful compromises and mistakes that her character, Mary Richards, seemed to transcend. The woman behind the smile. When we integrate all 5 aspects of Mary Tyler Moore's hidden story, a far more complex portrait emerges than the one-dimensional perfection presented in most discussions of her legacy. The woman who turned the world on with her smile was simultaneously navigating profound grief over her son's death, battling alcoholism that threatened her health and career, maintaining emotional distance from those around her while projecting warmth on screen, fighting behind-the-scenes battles for more progressive content, and enduring a marriage that ultimately collapsed under the weight of competing ambitions and emotional disconnection. This more complete understanding of Moore doesn't diminish her achievements, but rather highlights the extraordinary resilience required to build her legendary career while carrying burdens few fans ever suspected. The gap between her sunny public image and her more complicated private reality reveals not hypocrisy, but the profound cost of maintaining the perfect persona that audiences and networks demanded, especially from women in the entertainment industry. Most significantly, recognizing the full complexity of Moore's life transforms our understanding of her most famous character. Mary Richards wasn't just a fictional creation, but a projection of Moore's own aspirations, an idealized version of female independence and competence that she struggled to fully embody in her real life. The hopefulness that made the character so beloved reflected Moore's own determination to keep moving forward despite personal setbacks that might have destroyed someone with less inner strength. The real Mary Tyler Moore wasn't the perfect, perpetually cheerful woman who tossed her hat in the air with carefree abandon. She was something far more interesting, a complex, flawed human being who created an iconic television character while fighting private battles that would have overwhelmed most people. Her greatest achievement wasn't projecting perfection, but persevering through profound personal challenges to create work that changed how America viewed women's possibilities. By understanding the full truth of her life, both the public triumphs and the private struggles, we can appreciate not just her talent, but her extraordinary courage in continuing to make others smile, even when she herself had plenty of reasons not to.